Welcome back to Kings of the North. Doug Lesmerises, thanks for being here. If you're watching live on YouTube, we're so glad that you're here. If you're listening back on a podcast, if you're watching back on YouTube later, Bill Landis not here live again today. He will be back live on Wednesday. He is alive. He's just not live on the show. But we do have Landis because you can't have a Landis-free show. You guys would go into withdrawal. So what we're doing on this show, back part of the show, the latest KOTN Showdown, Nebraska versus Washington. And the one thing, and I want to do this, I think, with you guys, because we need you. I don't mind putting a burden on you guys because you chose to be here. It's your fault for being here. There's nothing like coming on a show and blaming the audience. You chose this. We want feedback from you guys. It is hard for us on the showdowns to not spend 6 minutes talking about the fifth best cornerback on Nebraska. So we're going a little long on those. We got to shrink it a little bit. But this is a good Washington-Nebraska KOTN showdown. We've done Penn State versus Notre Dame. We did BYU versus Indiana. We're going to work through all the teams. That's the third segment. I want to do this maybe next week. Give us suggestions to make the show better. I've done this in the history of my career. I'm needy enough for this. I'm uncertain enough for this, but I believe in you guys enough for this. We want to know what you think, how we can be better, how we can tweak things, what you want to see that we don't do, what you do like that you want us to make sure we continue. AskKOTN@gmail.com. We might do a show or a segment about suggestions on how to make KOTN better. So if you want to send those in, we certainly appreciate that. KOTN, AskKOTN@gmail.com. Middle part of the show, Adam Rittenberg from ESPN. They did a great piece at ESPN.com going through everybody's offseason, all the Power Four teams. They ranked them, who did it best, ranked it by conference, the top 10 in the country. Talk to Adam about that because there's some interesting methodology there that I agree with that I think is often not the conversation around transfer portal, how you improve your team, what really a good offseason is. And this has been a continuing thing that Landis and I have discussed, that we don't know how to evaluate this yet as a sport. So because of that, I appreciate when anybody is trying. And I thought the piece that Adam and his colleagues at ESPN did was really good. So we run through strategies for the offseason, what's the best way to go about it. And then, of course, some of our teams, Oregon, Penn State, Utah, Illinois, Indiana, various northern teams that come up in that discussion. But we want to start with something. Man, it's so good to be here. Thanks, you guys, for being here. That is very specific to Ohio State. We certainly know that there is a contingent of our audience here that is Ohio State based. But I think this applies. I'm interested in hearing, and again, we want to hear from you guys on this, AskKOTN@gmail.com. Whether you're an Ohio State fan, a Michigan fan, or a fan of somebody else, it's about kickoff times. And obviously, Ohio State fans know this. It's been an ongoing conversation. Maybe not everybody else who's not an Ohio State fan has been aware of this, but the big noon thing with Ohio State, I think, has come to a head. And it is this idea that Ohio State and Texas are going to be on Fox. That has been announced on week 1, August 30th. And Fox has that game. The way the Big Ten TV contract works, Fox is involved, CBS is involved, NBC is involved. But I believe the facts of the matter are that Fox gets the first 3 picks for the games they want. They always take Ohio State, Michigan first, and that remains at noon. That makes everybody happy, which is a little bit of a complicating thing here. But then the Fox gets the next 2 picks. Last year, they traded the 3rd pick to NBC, which is how NBC got the Ohio State-Oregon game at night. And they traded that 3rd pick for some other things. But Fox has picked Ohio State, Texas, I guess, as their 2nd pick. And then there's this Ohio State, Penn State game that is waiting out there. But it really is a thing. And this matters because it's specifically affecting Ohio State fans. But I like the topic because it's about fans and it's about your enjoyment. And this is one of those things where TV networks, announcers, kickoff times, these are the things that actually affect your lives. Ticket prices, parking, concession prices, all these kind of things. This is what matters to you. So this is a topic that really matters. I want to run through this and I want to make it at least interesting for everybody, not just Ohio State fans, but I have like 9 things here that are at play. And the question is, Ohio State, Texas, should it be at noon? Should Ohio State fight this? Why is Ohio State mad? Why are Ohio State fans frustrated by this? Is there a solution? And how much right do schools and their fan bases have to complain about things or fight back against things when you've taken the money from the TV networks? And I do think sometimes this is what the money is for. This is what the money is for. You take the money, you sort of have to live with it. But I do think as we change so much in this sport, beginning with conference realignment, moving on through the transfer portal and the payment of players and all these things that have changed, I don't think you can blindly pine for the past and just think that everything the old way was better. But I do find it interesting and reasonable at times to say, okay, I get this, but have we gone too far? When we think about what this sport is, when we think about who this sport serves, when we think about what we're supposed to be doing here, have we gone too far? So we're gonna talk about this. I promise I'll try to make it interesting. Here we go. This is the issue. Ohio State fans seems generally don't want the Texas game to open the season to be at noon. Why? Oh, and there's a somebody in the Ohio legislature. I think it is Representative. What's the guy's name? Representative. I want to get famous from football, I think is the guy's name. My goodness. The politicians who are like, I know there's a lot to deal with in the world, but oh man, if I could inject myself into a college football issue to try to get on the news for 10 minutes because I love my home state team, you should love your home state team. You're representing constituents who do love their home state team. And I'm not saying that this doesn't matter to your constituents. I'm saying maybe there's other things that matter a little bit more. I think there are legislatures across this great land of ours, Congress people, state legislators who just want to be college football podcast hosts. So I will make this proposal. If you currently are a state legislator in any state and you want a job swap for a day and you want to be a college football podcast host, because that's kind of what you actually would rather do, I will job swap you and I will go legislate for a day. And in my brief little window of time, try to make this state, this world better for the people who live in it. And you can come on here and talk about college football because you're all so thirsty. The politicians who inject themselves in this are so thirsty. Let me get a little bit of that home state football juice. Glug, glug, glug. Be thirstier. So this guy, Representative, I want to get famous from football, proposed a bill that if it's a top 10 matchup, you can't play at noon, which again, I mean, it's like, I think the founding fathers thought about putting that in the Constitution. If you're playing the game, don't make it too early in the day, but they didn't. Here's the reality of the situation based on what Representative I want to get famous from football proposed. There were 6 regular season games last year involving top 10 teams. 3 of them were at noon. 3 of them were in prime time. The 3 at noon were all Big Ten games. Texas, Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, Indiana, Ohio State. So those 3 Big Ten games were at noon because of Fox. The 3 in primetime were the Ohio State-Oregon game, which got into primetime on NBC, as we said, kind of through a trade. And then Georgia, Alabama, and Georgia, Texas, because we're just in a situation with the SEC where if you have a giant SEC game like that, of course it's going to be in prime time. And a lot of this is sort of like, it's not the SEC's fault, but it's the SEC's way of doing things that has some of the Ohio State fans and maybe other fans thinking that like prime time is the way to go. So to be fair, like the SEC is not dealing with this. Representative I want to get famous from football in the state of Alabama does not have the opportunity to introduce this bill because there is no way that an Alabama-Georgia game would be on at noon in the state of Alabama or in the state of Georgia if those teams are playing each other. Okay. Number 2, this is a shift for Ohio State. Between 2002 and 2018, Ohio State played 13 games that were top 10 matchups. And from 2019 to 2024, Ohio State has played as 9 games that are top 10 matchups. 2002 to 2018, no games at noon, 4 midday, like around 3:30, 9 in prime time. The 9 games since 2019, 6 at noon, none at midday, 3 in prime time. So Ohio State went from, if you had a game that big, it was never at noon between 2002 and 2018 to now 2/3 of the time it's at noon. That is a shift. That's hard to get used to. So you can understand fans thinking like, we've been trained to think about big games this way, and now you're doing it this way. So I do think you can at least understand why, for Ohio State fans, this is an issue. 2002 to 2018, home top 10 matchups, there were 5 in that period that Ohio State fans got. Since 2019, there's been 1, the Notre Dame game at home on NBC to open the 2022 season. So again, you can at least understand why some Ohio State fans are upset by this. Number 3, like this is different, for instance, than Alabama. Okay. This is like, there are other teams who just aren't dealing with this. Top 10 matchups since 2002. Alabama has had 26 of them. 13 of them were in the midday and 13 of them were in prime time. None were at noon. Ohio State's had 22, 6 at noon, 4 in the midday, 12 at night. So again, it's actually not necessarily that Bama's had so many more at night, but there's just this noon window does not exist in the SEC for big games. It just does not exist. So again, people are trained, but you can look at a similar program to Ohio State and say, hey, they don't have to deal with this. They don't ever have to have their home games at noon. Why do we? Because of TV contracts, but we're understanding this. The 4th thing here is that we kind of have decided that prime time is cool. And I'm old enough, I've been covering the sport for 20 years now. I'm old enough to remember when people complained when big games were at night. If you don't live right near the campus, if you have an hour drive, a 2-hour drive, that's made longer by traffic, and now you have to drive there, and then the game gets over at 11:30 or midnight, and now you have to drive home, especially older fans. Like I can remember when this was not a thing that people wanted. And I do think that we've shifted over time to the extent last year, there was a weekend in the SEC where Ole Miss was playing Georgia and Alabama was playing LSU, and the networks made LSU Alabama the night game, and Georgia at Ole Miss was a 3:30 game, and Lane Kiffin complained. Because Ole Miss had played at LSU at night earlier that year, and now it was like, okay, there's 2 big matchups. LSU gets the primetime game at home. Ole Miss gets the 3:30 game at home, and Lane Kiffin's bad because primetime is cool. So home games on primetime last year, home games in primetime, just checking some major teams. Ole Miss 2, Georgia 2, Bama 3, Texas 3, Penn State 2, Michigan 2, Oregon 2, Ohio State 1, and it was Western Michigan. So Ohio State fans are sort of jonesing for the cool primetime game. Like last year was really weird. 8 home games last year for Ohio State, 5 at noon, 2 in the midday, 1 in primetime, and it was Western Michigan on the Big Ten Network. So you understand why Ohio State fans might be feeling this way. 5th thing, like from a rating standpoint, this is a little bit to me a war between, we talk about a lot, whether college football really anymore is just a TV show. And if it's a TV show, then I don't know if you care as much. Maybe you want to have a party with your friends at your house. Maybe you want to go out to a sports bar at night. I get that. But I do think, and maybe I'm wrong, tell me if I'm wrong, ask KOTN@gmail.com. I know, again, there are people who have very strong feelings on this. There are some people who have very mute feelings on this. Moot. Well, whatever. I don't know why people care so much. I think this is more a live situation of the people who are going to the game like the night feel. It is sort of for a big game. It might be harder to get around and get there by noon. I do think the program can feel it. If you want to get recruits there for a night game, that's a great atmosphere. But anymore, are you getting recruits because you created a great atmosphere? You're getting recruits because your NIL's in great shape and you send guys to the NFL. So, but the ratings last year, for instance, Ohio State, Oregon at night got 9.6 million viewers on NBC. Ohio State, Penn State at noon got 9.8 million viewers on Fox. So from the TV network standpoint, like Fox likes this window, and I don't know that there's proof that we see much bigger ratings for the primetime game. In 2022, Ohio State, Notre Dame got 10.5 million viewers at night. But for instance, Alabama, Texas was at noon that year because when Texas was the home team in that Alabama, Texas series they played before Texas moved to the SEC, Fox had that. And that noon game was 10.6 million. So Ohio State, Notre Dame at night, 10.5, Alabama, Texas during the day, 10.6. The ratings come out okay. So this really is a conversation about live atmosphere at a game. Do fans want that nighttime, primetime, cool, big game atmosphere under the lights? Is that what you want now as a fan, the vast majority of fans? And does that create a conflict between TV and the live product, which is an interesting conversation about college football? What is the main thing about college football now? Is it the live experience for 70, 80, 90, and then we know at Ohio State, 105, 110,000 people? Or is it about the millions of people who are consuming it as a TV product, and TV drives the entire sport? So TV drives the sport, but then how does the needs and wants of the live audience fit in there? I think it's an interesting conversation. Number 6 on this. Ohio State, Michigan are carrying the load on this. Big noon. That Fox started this thing in 2019. The number of times that teams have been on big noon, at being this noon Fox game since 2019. Here's the other complicating factor here. Ohio State and Michigan want to be on at noon for their game at the end of the year. So there's a little bit of a thing here. If fans in the school, they don't want it early in the year, but they do want it late in the year, there's a little bit of a, okay, like, which do you value more? I would wonder that from Ohio State and Michigan fans. Would you rather make sure that Ohio State, Michigan never moves to night and you always get that at noon? Of course, in 2006, it was moved to 3:30. It was so huge. Is this a trade-off? We'll play more noon games during the year to make sure Ohio State, Michigan stays at noon at the end of the year? Or would you rather have more primetime games all year, which then I think does risk Ohio State, Michigan moving to night? So if you have to lean one way, do you lean noon or do you lean primetime, knowing how it affects that rivalry? Ohio State, Michigan have carried the load here. Since 2019, Ohio State, 20 big noon games. That's not counting the Ohio State, Michigan game, because I'm trying to couch this as a burden. You have to do this. The Ohio State, Michigan game is not a burden. So that's what Ohio State, Michigan fans want. So Ohio State, 20 games on big noon, 25 overall. Michigan, 17 non-Ohio State games. So that's 22 overall. And then you look at the rest of this: Oklahoma, 11. Penn State 10, Texas 8, Nebraska 8, Indiana 7, Wisconsin 6, Colorado 5, Maryland 5, TCU 5, Iowa, West Virginia, Kansas State 4. Ohio State, Michigan are the teams that get put here because they are the ratings draw for Fox. Home games. This includes all of them, including the Ohio State, Michigan game. Home big noon games since 2019. Ohio State 18, Michigan 13, Oklahoma 5, Penn State 4, Texas 4, Nebraska 2. That's a lot for Ohio State to carry. Now, the other thing about this is I've talked to somebody around the Michigan program. It doesn't feel like Michigan fans are bothered by this to the same extent that Ohio State fans are. So Ohio State and Michigan clearly carrying the load, although 18 home games since 2019 for Ohio State compared to 13 for Michigan. That is 5 more. But again, that Ohio State, that's triple anybody else. And part of it here, the idea that Oklahoma and Texas used to be part of this package because they were in the Big 12 and Fox had the Big 12. Now they're in the SEC. Fox is really looking for big audiences in that noon game. Who are they going to get? They're going to go to Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State because they've lost those 2 anchors just from an audience standpoint, not necessarily from a good football standpoint, but from an audience standpoint. Losing Oklahoma and Texas, Red River used to be a staple of big noon. That's a loss that only puts a bigger burden on Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State. So that is fact, that Ohio State has been asked to do this the most, or told to do this the most. Michigan the second most, and then these home games, it's a huge drop-off. Okay? So that's just a fact. Last year, the home sites for the 14 big noon games, Ohio State 5, Michigan and Penn State 2 each, Wisconsin, Iowa, Indiana, Colorado, West Virginia 1. 5 of 14 is Ohio State. Again, they're carrying a lot here and they don't want to carry it. Next thing, this is actually more of a loss of 3:30 games for Ohio State than primetime games. So it's what are you upset about if you are upset about this as a fan? Are you upset that you aren't getting more primetime games, or are you upset that there's so many noon games and you would take 3:30? Representative, I want to get famous from football, just is saying any top 10 game shouldn't be at noon. So if getting more 3:30 games, that old, like traditional kind of big time window, right? CBS used to have the big 3:30 SEC games. Like ABC used to do that 3:30. That's a big time game. Would that satiate fans? Okay, at least we're not at noon. 3:30 is cool. Or do you want prime time? Here's the comparison. The last 6 years versus the previous 6 years. Ohio State, the home games for Ohio State from 2013 to 2018 versus 2019 to 2024. Noon games, 37% of home games were at noon between 2013 and 2018. Since 2019, 58%. So it went from 37% to 58%. The midday games, 3:30 or so, went from 42% to 20%. The primetime games basically stayed the same, 21%, 23%. So the primetime games are the same. What has happened is a lot of those big 3:30 games are now at noon. So Ohio State is playing in the last 6 years, has played 58% of its home games at noon. That is a lot. For, I think, fans who had been getting conditioned that noon games are kind of like, oh, that's not as good of a game. That's an early Big Ten network game. So you got trained a certain way, and then all of a sudden Fox came in and said, no, noon is cool, and do you buy it? The other thing is Ohio State has not had like a big-time home game at night in 2 years. Last year, the only one was Western Michigan. The year before that, the only one was Michigan State, what wasn't a top 25 game. So the last big-time game was the 2022 opener, so Ohio State fans are kind of like hungry for this, okay? The eighth thing. So this is, I think, an important number. 58% of your home games for Ohio State fans in the last 6 years at noon is a lot, but you really haven't lost primetime games. So we have to think about, again, what are you mad about? Are you mad at being at noon? Or are you mad about not enough prime time? Because it really is two separate conversations. The next thing, there's not a ton of programs, I think, that would complain about this. Again, I want to hear from Michigan fans. Are you okay with this? Michigan plays a lot of noon games. Are you okay with it? Do you wish you played more at 3:30 or in prime time? Is this a thing for Michigan fans? Because it certainly does seem to be for a contingent of Ohio State fans. I think Penn State probably starts to carry more of this burden. We've already seen this. The Ohio State Penn State games at Penn State, they want that to be a primetime whiteout. Fox says, no, we're going to play it at noon. Penn State doesn't like that. Traditionally, when those games were on ABC and ESPN, you had a big top 10, top 25 matchup, Ohio State at Penn State. You could almost guarantee that was going to be under the lights. Now you can almost guarantee that it's not going to be. So I think we feel that from Penn State fans too, that they don't love this. But there's another part of this, that there's so many fan bases that you would be excited to have big noon, right? Like you get Gus and Joel and you get that exposure. And so it's a very thin layer, I think, of teams who would be upset by this, but I get it. I think we understand this. So now I think we're maybe at the solution standpoint. Ohio State, Texas is on August 30th. And then we have Ohio State, Penn State, also in Ohio Stadium on November 1st. I think the solution to this, and it does, if you hear little things, like, is Ohio State pushing back on this? Like when the game was announced, it's on Fox, but it doesn't necessarily say noon. Is Ross Bjork, the Ohio State AD, trying to fight this a little bit? Andy, I'm referencing a story from Andy Staples from a couple years ago that talked about the CBS contract that it had with the SEC. And when CBS was with the SEC, and now, again, this is all switched. Now it's ESPN, ABC with the SEC, and CBS is now part of the Big Ten package with Fox and NBC. There was a game that CBS got one primetime game a year, okay? And one year they picked an early season game, and then they got that kind of was a dud, and they made that the primetime game. And then CBS got to LSU, Alabama later in the year, and they were like, oh, man, we really want LSU, Alabama to be at night, okay? So in 2011, CBS got in this situation and traded with ESPN. So CBS, even though it wasn't their official pick, could get LSU, Alabama in prime time, and they made a trade. Then after that, CBS learned its lesson. They picked Alabama, LSU in prime time for 7 straight years. Okay. But then in 2019, they picked Notre Dame, Georgia for the one CBS primetime game, which meant that Alabama, LSU, which wound up being the national champion LSU against Alabama game, was in midday on CBS. So they still kind of missed it on which game you really want in prime time. But the reference here that I think that matters is when a TV network got up against it, they made a trade. And so I think this is what should happen here. I think in the end, for Ohio State to be hosting two of the biggest 5 games of the college football season, I think you can characterize Ohio State, Penn State that way and Ohio State, Texas that way. I think one of those has to be at night for this fan base, for this program that hasn't had the previous 2 years a cool primetime game. I don't think you can have Penn State and Texas coming to town and have both of them be at noon. So the draft, right? If Fox gets the first 3 picks, they've taken Ohio State, Michigan, they've taken Ohio State, Texas. I don't know what that means, what's going to happen on November 1st with Ohio State, Penn State. Whether it's a trade, whether it's a discussion, whether it's Ohio State demanding something and working with everybody, I think either Ohio State, Texas or Ohio State, Penn State has to be in prime time. And I think if it's Ohio State, Penn State on November 1st, 4 of the last 10 Ohio State, Penn State games in Columbus have been in prime time, and they've all been, most of them in late October. You can play a primetime game in Columbus, Ohio on November 1st. It'll be okay. If they announce simultaneously that they've figured that out, that NBC is getting Penn State, Ohio State, and that's going to be at 8, and Ohio State, Texas is going to be at noon, or perhaps a flip. Maybe you make a trade, you somehow get, even though Fox has announced that early season game, you give that to NBC in primetime, Ohio State, Texas. Fox takes Ohio State, Penn State. I do think the Ohio State fan base has been pushed far enough when their only primetime game last year was Western Michigan to make sure that either Penn State or Texas is a primetime game this year. So figure that out. Networks work with conferences. I do think at times, we obviously know Ohio State is the biggest TV draw in the Big Ten. We know Michigan's a huge draw. We know Penn State's a huge draw. But Ohio State drives a lot of these TV dollars. And I think every now and then, in the end, it works better to work together. I think part of the reason the Big Ten is thriving right now and did not break apart or did not lose its cornerstone teams the way the Big 12 did is because Ohio State always got along with everybody more than, for instance, Texas did in the Big 12. And so the strength of the Big Ten, I think, is somewhat related to the fact that Ohio State and Michigan and Penn State to some degree have always played nice. But I do think that means at times you put your foot down. So can you demand it? You took the money, but everybody's getting the money. And Ohio State played 5 big noon games last year and 1 primetime game. I think this is a moment. So I think for Ohio State fans to be upset, I think for Ross Bjork, the AD, if they are putting their foot down, I get it. I think the answer is one of those 2. So however they come to that agreement, Ohio State, Texas, Ohio State, Penn State, 1 at noon on Fox to keep Fox happy, 1 at night to give Ohio State that huge primetime game. Okay. Ask KOTN@gmail.com. The idea that, do you think primetime is the cool spot for college football now? Can you be happy with the noon game? Does it feel big? I also think a little bit of this, and the last thing on this is, I don't know if Fox bears the brunt of this, that we know they bring their show, but also they don't have to bring the kickoff show, the pregame show to the place that's having the noon game, just like ESPN doesn't always have game day at the place where they're going to show a game that night. I think their show, I think the Urban Meyer, Mark Ingram, Brady Quinn show is pretty good. I think they've done a good job with that. I think Joel Klatt and Gus Johnson are a good combo. But I don't know if the broadcast itself, that noon game, the game, not the pregame, have they done a good enough job making sure that noon game feels like a monster so that it feels cool, it feels special? Because the lights and the moon and all the things at night automatically help a primetime game feel special. Has Fox done enough to make the noon game feel special? I think Fox does bear, if they want this, I think they have a responsibility to rise to the occasion. I think they probably can do better. That was a lot on that. I apologize for going so long, but I think it's a somewhat interesting conversation. We want to hear you guys. This is the last thing before we get into Adam Rittenberg and then Bill Landis, and you're tired of just me talking by myself. Am I a honk? Am I a honk? When I'm a honk, tell me I'm a honk. And I might have been a little honk-ish on the Penn State Notre Dame show. This is our guy, Jeff. I said in passing on the Notre Dame Penn State KOTN Showdown a week ago, talking about pressure on Notre Dame and Penn State, Bill was talking about Penn State maybe in the past not living up to its preseason ranking. And I said, Notre Dame is the most overrated team in the history of the preseason polls. Jeff wrote in at Ask KOTN and said, that was straight honk mentality. Notre Dame has outperformed its preseason ranking 5 of the last 8 years. And the other 3, they missed it by just 1, 3, and 13 spots. Out of one disaster in 2016, Notre Dame is one of the more accurately rated, if not underrated teams in recent preseason polls. Absolutely love you guys. Keep up the great work. And I say, keep up the great work calling me a honk, because I did look at this and there was something that was in my mind from recent history when there are people who track this kind of thing. Once upon a time, Notre Dame was one of the more overrated teams that would be ranked highly in the preseason and then not live up to it by the end of the year. In the last 25 years, Notre Dame preseason poll versus end of the year poll, they've been better at the end of the year than in the preseason 9 times. They've been worse at the end of the year than in the preseason 11 times, and 5 times they weren't ranked or they were tied or whatever. So that's pretty even. And then there's another thing that by Stassen, I think it's Chris Stassen. There's some great data work that's done out there. There's a Stassen website that has tracked this. It didn't include last year's, but 1989 to 2023, they did a consensus preseason ranking and then where you finished at the end of the year and who the most overrated teams were. These were the most overrated teams from 1989 to 2023. USC, Texas, Florida State, Nebraska 4, then Michigan and Notre Dame tied for 5th. Then Miami, LSU, Texas A&M, Clemson, Florida, Tennessee. 8 of the top 12 in the South. So Notre Dame there is tied for the 5th most overrated team. More of that is earlier than later. As Jeff said, like lately, they've actually been pretty good. So I apologize. That was an incorrect statement by me. And I always get in trouble when I'm making a statement that begins with, I didn't look this up. And then I state something. That's not great podcasting. That's not great YouTubing. So, Jeff, you are correct. Notre Dame is not the most overrated team. Historically, it is one of the top 5 overrated teams, but actually lately they've been pretty darn good, living up to their billing. Okay, let's take a break. How can we make the show better? What do you think about noon versus prime time? Do you care as a fan of your own team? Is it something that you like? Do kickoff times really matter to you? All that, send it to askkotn@gmail.com. After this break, we'll be back. Who won the college football offseason with Adam Rittenberg? And then after that, Landis and I digging in deep, breaking down Nebraska and Washington. Joined now by Adam Rittenberg, friend of the program from ESPN and ESPN.com. Adam, thanks for your time as always.
You bet. Great to be with you, Doug.
You guys did a bunch of work, which we certainly appreciate here at KOTN when other college football people do loads of work that we can then just comment upon and do not have to do ourselves. You and your colleagues at ESPN.com ranked the off seasons for all the major college football teams. And I find this both a very difficult thing to do, but also a very valuable exercise because we at this point in the sport have a million recruiting rankings and we don't have, I think, holistic roster evaluations, which I know a lot of people are very interested in. So, thank you for doing it, first of all. And I also was super intrigued by the 3 categories that you said at ESPN.com were the main things you evaluated in terms of who had the best offseason. You said retention of key players. Now, not the guys you lost to the draft, but basically that anybody that could have gone in the portal that did not go in the portal. So it's keeping your guys, then it's keeping your coaches, and then it's adding guys. What was this process like? And do you think we have a handle on roster evaluation in college football now, or are we still not very good at this? Because I think it is difficult to figure out who is doing this best.
Right. Yeah. And that's important to recognize, is that not every philosophy is the same as far as building your roster and enhancing your roster. There's teams that go heavily into the transfer portal every offseason. There's others that are much more selective in terms of who they add, and they really need to have a stronger hit rate in order to reach their potential from a roster standpoint. But, I think those three elements are all really important. And what I didn't want to do at the end of this, I mean, we obviously went through each offseason, and that's just a lot of researching and sort of evaluating who was added, who was lost, and that type of thing. But I didn't want to get to our national top 10 and just have teams on there that added a lot from the portal, that just grabbed and grabbed and grabbed. And there's no better example of that, I think, than what Florida State has been through the last few years. And so if you haven't followed Florida State, they have been a team that has largely built its roster through the transfer portal. And you saw how great that was in 2022 and 2023, especially 2023, going 13-0 and winning the ACC championship. And then you saw the downsides of that last year when it completely fell apart. So just because you add a lot doesn't necessarily mean you had the best offseason. And I think that's really, really important when we're kind of looking at this, stepping back from a national perspective, like I did with Max Olson and Eli Letterman and Bill Connolly. And so this was an exercise where we really, at least at the end, tried to weight those different things and come up with a mix of teams at the top that in some cases were very active in the portal, like an LSU, certainly like a Texas Tech, but then also teams that did a nice job of keeping who they needed to keep, who could have gone to the draft, and then retaining or adding to their coaching staff, and then making some important additions. And, from a team that's obviously one that you cover in your region, Penn State is a really good example of that. Penn State didn't lose their quarterback to the NFL draft. Penn State kept, two running backs who could have gone to the NFL, even though it was a very crowded year for running backs this year in the draft. They keep a guy like a denied Dennis Sutton, who I think is going to be an All-America type candidate at defensive end. They kept some other valuable players on defense. And then, they bring in Jim Knowles, who was probably the top coordinator hire of the entire offseason. And then they, in the portal, instead of grabbing, they addressed a position that was deficient and has been deficient, and that's wide receiver. And whether it works or not, we're going to find out. But I think that was the spot that they had to bring in some potential impact players, and a guy like Trevor Pena from Syracuse is that guy, along with a few others. So I think it's really important not to get carried away with portal additions and numbers and just say, oh, well, that makes an offseason great.
There are certainly different strategies. I think I've sort of broken it down into three things when it comes to the portal. There are some teams who are just rebuilding their team, right? And you look at, for instance, and a lot of those are when you get a new coach. So you look at what Purdue and West Virginia are doing this offseason. You lose so many guys, it's basically a whole new team. And that is often out of necessity, out of desperation. Even Jed Fish has kind of talked about that at Washington. A year ago, they were just trying to field a roster. And now in year two, they're able to be more targeted and more specific with things they want to add. So sometimes you're just wiping the slate clean and starting over again. Then I do think you have teams that are targeting weaknesses. You mentioned it with Penn State, and I think we've seen that with teams like, okay, maybe we don't want to be in here that much, but if we have a deficiency, we'll try to improve that. But then I do think there are those teams, and I think Ohio State was an example of this last year, and I feel like maybe more teams are doing this, where okay, if we have a deficiency, we want to target that. We're not revamping the roster, but we want to be generally open to good players who can help us, even if it's not a weakness. Did Ohio State need Quinshon Judkins a year ago? No. But did Quinshon Judkins help them? Yes. And I do think Penn State, I think Trevor Pena is one of the biggest additions of the offseason, but even adding a linebacker, and I think just James Franklin maybe being a little more open to it. I think Kirby Smart feels maybe a little more open to it across the board generally at Georgia. You mentioned that you see the different strategies. If you were a head coach of a good college football team, what would your portal strategy be?
Right. It's a great question. I mean, I probably have to think about where I'm working, to start off with. Am I at a program that is near a major market? Because I think that's a place where you can certainly add transfers. SMU did this really well. Being in Dallas, they would be the bounce back program. So it might be that job. But if I'm at an established, A-list program, we're talking Georgia, Ohio State, Alabama, Texas, Penn State, I would be more selective than a volume transfer team. I think for the most part, my players are coming there to be there for 3 years and then move on to the NFL. And then those that stay 4 years, it's a bonus. And I'm also going to be very, very attractive to players at lesser programs who want a bigger opportunity. And I think Ohio State's done a really nice job of that, even this particular offseason, adding some of the players that they did. The tight end from Purdue, who I hear great things about, Max Clare. The offensive linemen from places like Minnesota, and I know they picked up a kid from Rice. Those are very, very valuable additions potentially for Ohio State. And so I think I would operate more like that, and quite frankly, a lot more like Michigan has. I think Michigan has been really, really good with its portal hit rate. And they've had a program that players want to stay at. They don't have droves of players that are transferring out that have somewhat of a role on the team. And then they've been very, very good at finding, the transfers that can come in and really help them. And that's going to get tested this year because they need the transfers a lot more this year at Michigan than they have the last few off seasons. And, the defensive tackles they brought in, the running back they brought in, potentially the quarterback, Mike McKean, just as another option there. Like, they're going to need their transfers. But I think in general, if I'm a program that has the resources to retain my top players, always going to recruit well out of high school, and be very attractive to transfers, I would be very selective in terms of who I would bring in, and not just grab at guys. But I think your point about Ohio State, Doug, is a really good one, because I thought the same thing when they added. Yeah, we all knew that Ohio State, after losing again to Michigan and not having a chance to win a national championship, and then Michigan going on to win one, they were going to be really aggressive with money, right? But when they added Judkins, I'm like, why add a second running back? That doesn't seem to be necessary here. And yet it turned out to be necessary to win a national championship. So those things are important, and each coach is taking a little bit of a different approach. I think, Dabo Swinney finally added a couple of transfers this offseason. Kirby Smart, they don't add a lot, but they had the Branch brothers from USC and a few other guys. They picked up, obviously, Josh McCray from Illinois. So I think that's probably what I would do if I was in one of those roles.
Some teams have gone too far, but I even think we've done a lot this offseason with measuring how much teams used the portal last year. I think the number for Georgia, we look at top 30 guys and number of snaps who played for you last year. I think only one of Georgia's top 30 guys from last year was a transfer from last season, Trevor Etienne. That was it. So that's not enough. So I think a place like Georgia, like Kirby cracking the door even a little bit more, can make a difference. James Franklin, after he won its 100th game and beat SMU in the playoff last year, I was at that game. He's at the news conference talking about 100 wins, sort of almost bragging about the idea that they don't really use the portal, that their guys, their contributors have been there the whole time, which is admirable and which is the way to build a foundation. But you don't want to be so locked in on that you close your eyes to guys who can help you. So I feel like he's cracked the door wider just a little bit more. And I think for teams like Georgia and Penn State that are trying to get over the top and win it all, you have to be slightly more open. Now, but I do want to go to Texas Tech, which you mentioned earlier. I'm not buying it. Now, I mean, we're a Northern show here. But so here's the thing. In the North, the two teams that went crazy in the portal last year were Deion Sanders at Colorado and Curt Cignetti at Indiana. Curt Cignetti is a very specific situation, I think, because he basically smushed two teams together. He just took the 10 best players from JMU and put them on Indiana, and they made the playoff, and that's very unique. And I just think on some level, Deion Sanders is Deion Sanders. And to try to say, hey, I'm going to do what Deion Sanders does is like, well, it honestly worked for him. I'm not sure you can do it. Texas Tech, I think, is tied for the best odds to win the Big 12. It looks like they're going to have about half their starters being guys coming in the portal this year. For a team like that, my instinct is not to buy it. that I don't think you can buy a conference championship team in one offseason. I get why they are doing it, but I am suspect of it, that not that they won't be competitive, but that, oh, wait, I think Texas Tech's going to win the Big 12. I don't think that.
Yeah, I think that's a fair position to take, especially with so many new people in that building trying to form a championship level product this fall at a program that really hasn't contended very often for anything meaningful in its history, other than the couple of years when Mike Leach was the head coach there. And so I think that's a totally fair position to take. I think, again, if you're Texas Tech, what differentiates you? I mean, it's Lubbock, Texas. You're not a blue blood. You'll never be a blue blood, but man, you got money. I mean, you got money. Cody Campbell's got money, and he's willing to spend it, and he's willing to spend it at incredible rates. And, you know, it's not apples to apples, but objectively looking at the traits of programs, the University of Oregon should not be a top 10 program. It just shouldn't because of where it's located. And so I understand the mindset of Texas Tech to say, listen, we're never going to get players just based on the brand of Texas Tech. We're certainly not going to have a championship level team based on our location. So what can we offer? We have these deep-pocketed oil dudes, and they're willing to spend a lot of money to bring guys to Lubbock, even if it's a year. So I don't think there's a huge downside in that. I'm very curious to see what will happen if they aren't successful. But there's always risk, Doug, in bringing in those new personalities, even if they're all very talented people individually. I mean, I would also make the case that Texas Tech, you upgraded its coaching staff. I mean, Mac Leftwich is a young guy that has generated a lot of buzz from a coordinator standpoint. Shale Wood has done a nice job as well on the defensive side. And so it may work, but it may just not be the right pieces to put together a championship product. It doesn't mean that they shouldn't do this. I just don't know if there's another approach that can be as successful, because, I mean, we all said, oh my God, Arizona State won the Big 12 and they were picked to finish last. Well, if you followed Arizona State, they've been one of the biggest underachieving programs in college football in the last 40 years. There's no reason why Arizona State, given where it's located, shouldn't be a top 20, top 25-ish program. And now in a league where that's good enough to contend for the championship, it shouldn't be that much of a shocker. If you're Texas Tech, it's a much harder road because of your history and your location. So I get both sides of it.
Yeah, and I get why they are doing it. To me, it's just I don't get why, if anybody is out there looking at Texas Tech, and then you see like just the depth of talent and the additions that Kansas State has made, and what Utah, they have a structure there and a winning program, and they added some smart portal stuff. I'd rather be Utah than Texas Tech. I'd rather be BYU than Texas Tech. You know, Iowa State lost some key guys, but we know what Matt Campbell's about. They build from within. I'd rather be Iowa State. So it's one of those. I'm not saying that Texas Tech shouldn't do it. I just am always curious if we fall for it. You know, that's the main thing. It's like, oh, look at them. They brought in 40 dudes. And it's like, really? Is that like, that's what you're shooting for? It's what they have to do. It's their path to compete. But I'd rather be Kansas State. You brought up Oregon. Penn State and Oregon were the top two Big Ten teams in the offseason rankings that you guys did. You already talked about Penn State in a very smart way. Oregon is super interesting to me. They are more aggressive, like they are more in the portal than maybe a team like Ohio State, but they're also targeted. They rebuilt an entire secondary last year, and it worked. Now they're rebuilding a secondary again with Taron Johnson and Dylan Thieneman. They lost two awesome tackles. They brought in two awesome tackles. They lost a great running back. They brought in a great running back in Mekhi Hughes. They, to me, are sort of the highest quantity and quality combination, that they're doing more and probably need more than schools like Ohio State or Georgia or Alabama, but they're also not just randomly throwing stuff around. Why is Oregon number 2 in their rankings? I'm a little curious about Oregon this year. I just wonder if it might be a half step back, but what do you think of Oregon's offseason?
Yeah, number 2 in the Big Ten rankings. Just wanted to clarify from
right.
In the Big Ten rank behind Penn State, but certainly a top 10 offseason. Doug, we could almost do a full show on Oregon as it relates to the Big Ten, because I really believe that Oregon was the type of school the Big Ten was waiting for in terms of how they operate, the aggressiveness that they take towards the personnel space. It reminds me a little bit of when Urban Meyer came into the Big Ten and was like, what are we doing here? Like, let's get our butts in gear from a personnel standpoint, because this isn't good enough. And I love the way that Oregon, I mean, I don't cover recruiting as intently as Eli Letterman. I don't cover the transfer portal as intently as Max Olson. But in looking at when top guys are making their decisions, it feels like Oregon is always involved with a top 10 recruit or a top 10 transfer guy. And obviously they have the money and it's Nike, and I get it. But it just impresses me that that's a name that you're always hearing, that's part of that mix. And I think it's very necessary in the Big Ten to have a program like Oregon. I mean, not to dump on Nebraska, but they're everything that the Big Ten hoped Nebraska was and hasn't been.
Yes,
and more. And it's been a tremendous addition already to the conference. Their offseason was really good. Again, you can't penalize them for losing a record 10 players to the NFL draft. That's going to happen when you're the number one team for most of the season and the number one team going into the college football playoff. You're going to lose great players. But to their credit, they have retained good players. Evan Stewart, I mean, when he got there, if you told me he would be a 2-year player at Oregon, I would have said no way. And yet he is. On the defensive side, Uyangalele, you're bringing him back, making sure that they weren't rated. You mentioned the additions that they've made through the portal, adding all Big Ten caliber players from other programs, bringing in a guy like Mekhi Hughes from Tulane, who was one of the top running backs available, to try to address that position. I really love what they do and the aggressiveness that they show. And also the fact that, one of the components we talked about was coaching staff retention. Other than Junior Adams, who left for a position in the NFL, who had been at Oregon for a number of years and had coached in that region, Dan Lanning kept everybody. Will Stein's still there. Tosh Lupoy is still there. They have a great continuity. It just feels to me, Doug, that Oregon is a place that people want to be. And it's not just because of the swoosh. There's other things going on there that Dan has created. It's really, again, you probably had the same thing. I mean, they're hiring Dan Lanning to replace Mario Cristobal. Like, is that going to work? And a few years later, he's been exactly who they wanted to be. A guy that was so aggressive like Mario in the portal and in recruiting, and yet maybe has some of the qualities that Mario has lacked, and his. So I'm very, very high on them, obviously. Not saying they're going to win the Big Ten again or run the table or be the number one seed in the college football playoff, but they are building the program and their roster the way that they need to, and really making that a place that coaches and players want to stay at for a while.
Again, overall top 10 off seasons for you guys. LSU 1, Texas Tech 2, Penn State 3, Oregon 4, Clemson 5, Oklahoma 6, Auburn 7, Miami 8, Illinois 9, and Arizona State 10. I want to ask you about Illinois and Indiana. They, I think, were 3 and 4 in your Big Ten ratings. Lot of enthusiasm around Illinois. We've had a lot of enthusiasm around Illinois on this show for the entire offseason. Some of the defensive linemen they brought in from Wisconsin, the idea that they kept Luke Altmaier, even though they lost Josh McCray. They have 2 other good running backs there. They kept some really important defensive players. How much do you believe in Illinois? We've been saying for a long time, could Illinois be the Indiana of this year? And then Indiana, they're not going to have the JMU influx that they had a year ago, but I do think Curt Cignetti has a handle on especially up transfers, and whether that's from the MAC, whether that's from FCS, that he came up through those ranks. So I think he has an eye for talent, and I could see Indiana being a place long-term while he's there, that guys like that relate to Curt Cignetti and that staff. And if they're going to move up, they'll move up to Indiana. So Illinois' offseason, Indiana's offseason, and what do you think about those two teams for this year?
It's interesting, Doug. I was talking with Brett Bielema, I think it was in late February, about off seasons, and he said, "Listen, we won't. We didn't know he didn't know we were doing this project. I don't think we even knew it, but he said we're not going to be ranked high in the off season because we didn't add a bunch of guys." And so it's sort of reinforcing that mindset, like, to have a great off season, you need to add and add and add.
Right.
But what we did do, in his words, was keep guys who were able to go to the NFL draft or certainly to transfer elsewhere they were able to keep all their top guys. That was obviously before Josh McCray ended up transferring to Georgia. But I was down there in late March and sometime in late March, early April in Champaign. And they are very excited about the potential of having all of these guys back and what they could do this season, realizing that it's not guaranteed. And that's been the big message to them is to their players is just because you're all here and we had a 10-win season last year doesn't mean that we're going to just run it back and it's going to be even better than that. So, but I think there's a familiarity there with the roster. There's a familiarity with the coaching staff and Barry Lenny Jr. and Aaron Henry at the coordinator spots. And Brett's made some nice additions from a support staff standpoint. They have addressed the receiver position. It's somewhat similar to Penn State. Both, in Illinois' case, they lost good receivers to the NFL or elsewhere, and they had to backfill those spots, and they were able to do that through the portal. So, I think it's been a really good offseason. I mean, being able to keep a guy like Gabe Jacobs and certainly Luke Altmaier, who was on Tennessee's radar after Nico transferred out, was I think a really good plus for them. And I think Indiana had a really good offseason. Certainly wasn't far out of our top 10 by any means. I think we were debating between Arizona State at 10 and maybe even Indiana for that 10th spot. And I think the thing that strikes me about what Indiana's done is that they have shown a financial flex here for a couple of years. And we've all seen it covering the sport for a long time. The new coach gets more money than the coach that was just fired. And that happened with Coach Sig last year and Tom Allen. But then you wondered, well, what are they going to do when they follow up? Like, are they going to be able to follow that up and continue? Because there's no JMU roster for him to raid. He's at Indiana now. And so now it's about keeping your guys, which they did. You keep Mikhail Kamara and you keep Aiden Fisher and you keep D'Angelo Pons and you keep Elijah Surratt and some of those other players who certainly could have been targeted by other programs. And then you go out and add one of the better quarterbacks in the portal in Fernando Mendoza to be your guy now for possibly a couple of years. So I think it's a pretty exciting time to be an Indiana fan. And your point is really well taken as far as, being the program for the MAC guys to move up to, or the American guys to move up to, or maybe even some of the other group of five or FCS guys who have broken out. I mean, CJ West was an incredibly important part of Indiana's run to the college football playoff. Anyone who followed them shouldn't be surprised that he was the first player selected from Indiana for the NFL draft. I think that was a really good pick for it was San Francisco. I forget who got him. But I thought it was a tremendous draft pick. So this is now the new Indiana. And I think it's exciting from a personnel standpoint and how these off seasons are going to go there in Bloomington.
I want to rapid fire a couple of the northern teams with you before we let you out of here. Ohio State, number 5 in the Big Ten rankings. Coach retention. You lose your two coordinators in Jim Knowles and Chip Kelly. They lose offensive line coach Justin Fry. They do a really good job, I think, replacing him with Tyler Bowen from Virginia Tech. Matt Patricia, certainly an interesting swing. We certainly were circumspect about it early. I think there's early, getting him in the building. It's like, okay, maybe this has a better chance to work than we realized. Elevating Brian Hartline. They did, again, adding the 2 tackles, Ethan Onyanwa and Phillip Daniels. They add Max Clare at tight end, as you said. Bo Atkinson, defensive end from North Carolina. You kept the head coach and Jeremiah Smith and Caleb Downs, but really most of the key guys from a national championship game otherwise are gone. But all things considered, I think they went about trying to fill those holes the best they could. But for your rankings, you had to ding them a little bit for losing Knowles and Kelly, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think the overall loss of key people in that building is a bit staggering. But you're right. I think I think we'll know about the Patricia hire and we'll comment on it later on this year to see how it actually goes. Brian Hartline's been in this position before. There's still a belief, Doug, that Ryan Day is going to be very much in control of that offense, and we'll see how much autonomy he truly gives Brian now that he's got this opportunity again. And then again, I think from a personnel standpoint, they made some really good portal additions. And I think they were smart not to take 25 guys in the portal, because you're Ohio State. You're recruiting at an elite level. You still have really talented players in the program that just didn't have an opportunity to get ahead of these guys who went to the NFL draft. So I really like what they've done for the most part overall, reserving some judgment about the Patricia hire. But I think that they have absolutely a chance to get back to the playoff this year.
Nebraska, number 6 in your Big Ten rankings. Dane Key from Kentucky, one of the better receiver ads in the portal. They had 2 offensive line starters, one from Alabama, one for Notre Dame, which is a big deal. The Tony White loss, again, it's a defensive coordinator loss to Florida State that is super interesting. They promote from within there. A lot of people, us included, thought maybe, Matt Rule in year 2, that's kind of a magic year for him. Is Nebraska going to make a huge leap last year? Wasn't a huge leap, but at least it was a bowl leap. I like the idea. I'm curious about the execution. I'm not sure where to lean on Nebraska. And we're talking a lot about Nebraska on this show and other segments. Where are you?
Yeah, listen, I have taken the rigid position that I will reserve judgment about Nebraska every offseason until they really deliver. I will never be one of these people who talks about them as a top 10 program or a Big Ten title contender, because we've just been down the road too many times. However, they kept Dylan Raiola, which is a big deal.
It is.
They obviously added and helped him with you mentioned Dane Key, and some of those other pieces on the offensive side. Dana Holgerson, getting him in position as the OC early on, I think was a smart move by Matt Rule. The Tony White departure hurts. I think Tony is one of the best defensive coordinators in the country, and it stings when he's leaving your place, which is in a pretty good trajectory, for a kind of a mess in Tallahassee, where it could certainly work out great, but if it doesn't go well, that staff is probably getting fired this year.
Right.
So that's unfortunate. And we'll see, John Butler's got experience, could be fine in the long run. They've had a nice run on the defensive side there. But will they I just go back to talent. Will Nebraska ever be a top 3, top 4 Big Ten talent team again? I think it's going to be hard when you look at Oregon and you look at Ohio State and Penn State and sometimes Michigan, and we'll see who else are they that next most talented team? I think that's what we're wondering this year. And if they are, then they have a chance to be that last Big Ten playoff contender. If not, it's going to be more of the same 7, maybe 8 wins again, which is fine, especially given what they've been, but it certainly isn't what Nebraska fans want.
Iowa, Kirk Ferentz, he's one of those guys who's not going to go rebuild a team in the portal. I'm wondering if Mark Gronowski is a program changer for them for a year, but they've been so unsettled at quarterback and still been pretty darn good the last couple years. They are not very high in your rankings, and I think understandably 13th in the Big Ten. And Mark Gronowski didn't take part in spring. How big could he be for the Hawkeyes? You don't want to lay too much at this guy's feet, but I just think you look at some of the quarterback transfers that have hit in this era, and I think he could really hit.
Yeah, he could. And I think he was a really good addition for Iowa. The type of guy that I think could come in there with the experience and the demeanor to really connect well with Tim Lester and that staff and kind of command respect, even though he hasn't done a whole lot on the field because he's coming off of a significant surgery. But I think he absolutely, he needs to lift up the other guys on the offense, because they lose Caleb Johnson. They didn't go crazy in the portal, as you mentioned, with, 5 receivers and 3 tight ends. They're pretty much rolling with the guys that they had coming off of last year, with a couple of exceptions. And they believe that they've stabilized their offensive line, which had been, as much as the Brian Ferentz conversation kind of took on a life of its own, the underlying thing at Iowa was that they'd gotten away from being even a good offensive line for a few years. And I think they feel like they're back to being good, if not better than good. And then on the defensive side, Doug, it just feels like they're just sliding the next guys in. That could work. It also may not work. Phil Parker is literally one of the best coordinators on the planet. So I think they won't be bad defensively, but I do wonder if the star power that they lose on that side of the ball at some point will catch up with them. Will they just be Iowa and sound and not give up big plays and keep everybody under 20, 25 points? We'll see. Or are they going to have to score more points to win some of the close games that they've been so good at winning under Kirk, in spite of an offense that has been lacking. Let's be honest here for quite some time.
All right, one more team I want to ask about. It's Utah, 7th in your Big 12 rankings. I do think the trio of Jason Beck as an offensive coordinator, Devin Dampier as a quarterback, and Wayshawn Parker as a running back has a chance to be as transformative for an offense as any trio in the country. And when you're bringing Beck and Dampier together, I'm not disputing ranking them 7th, but we have been saying buy the dip on Utah, that we think Utah's going to be back because there is a foundation there with Kyle Whittingham. It got sideways last year, primarily because of the quarterback injuries, and they tried to play a true freshman quarterback when Cam Rising got hurt, and that just got away from them. But if you fix that, this is a winning program for 20 years. What are you thinking about Utah?
Yeah, I mean, they've really been impacted at quarterback, but for the last 2 years, that it's almost like a hostage situation there in terms of what's gone on with the injuries and the uncertainty at that position for 2 full seasons that isn't there anymore. And I think you mentioned that the Jason Beck, Devin Dampier package deal doesn't get talked about as much nationally as the Ben Arbuckle and John Mateer one that Oklahoma got from Washington State, but it could be just as impactful for Utah, which is a team that we're accustomed to contending for conference championships. And, it's not just those two, and you mentioned Wayshawn Parker, but retaining those 2 tackles, Doug, Texas wanted those guys. I mean, like there are some big name teams that wanted to raid Utah's roster on the offensive and defensive line and weren't really able to. And so I think if they're stout up front, and if a guy like Dampier and his skill set can make everybody better offensively and really help a wide receiving core that I think a lot of people are wondering, why didn't they go out and add some more at those positions? Could they have done better in the portal at receiver? Maybe a guy like Dampier and an offense like Beck's will open up some things for those guys that maybe wasn't there previously. So they're very interesting to me. I mean, that list of Big 12 title contenders, I think annually is going to be long. But this year, even though Utah finished where it did, they should be on that list, along with Iowa State and some of the other teams and that we're accustomed to seeing contend for the Big 12.
Yeah, I agree. And the last one we'll let you out of here on this, Adam. Again, it's so interesting to me as we all try to work out what works in the portal. I think I was looking at somebody's rankings, for instance, of running back transfers a year ago. I think Quinshon Judkins might have been one on that list. But I think Jonah Coleman at Washington, who was so huge, was 31 on that list. Des Reed at Pitt, who was transformative for that offense, I think was number 50 on that list. The main thing that I still feel like all of us have a little trouble getting a handle on is guys moving up, right? And we've had a lot of debate on this show. Would you rather have if you're a Power 4 contender, would you rather get a transfer who's a backup from a Power 4 team or a starter from a G5 team or an FCS team? And depending what the position is, there are certain positions where I certainly would rather have the starter, the guy with the experience at a lower level. I think in the end, people are pretty good at recruiting, figuring out who good recruits are. We're still, again, I think we just have a hard time sometimes trying to figure out, well, this guy kicked butt at Old Dominion, but is he going to help this team win the Big 12? And sometimes the answer is yes. And we're all still figuring that out. Do you still feel that?
Yeah, I do. And I think especially when they're perimeter oriented positions, I think that I would much rather, I think it's a great point you bring up of what you want. I would much rather have starting experience on the lines of scrimmage, regardless of where it is, coming up essentially. Like we mentioned CJ West earlier, his impact at Indiana, those types of players who had played a lot at one level, moving to the Power 4 can really, really help a team and shore up some certain positions. It's a little harder to project at running back, for example, or wide receiver, or even quarterback. Mark Gronowski has played and performed a lot longer than most of his peers in the Big Ten this year, but he's done it at South Dakota State. He hasn't done it at Ohio Stadium. He hasn't done it in Happy Valley or out at Autzen Stadium. So that's where the questions lie. But I think we all need to be more open-minded about who those players are and research them and figure them out, because we've seen it in the NFL draft that If you're, even if you stay at North Dakota State or a program like that, if you're good enough, they're going to come find you and want you to be part of their team. And I think there's a similar effect going on for these Big 12, Big 10, ACC type programs here in the North.
Adam Rittenberg, where can the folks find your work?
Yeah, find my work at ESPN.com. We'll have some more fun projects coming up. I'm ranking all the coaches as players in the next couple of weeks, and looking at some of the non-quarterback top playmakers around the country. I think that'll be next week. So ESPN.com college football page. Obviously, I'll post all my work on X at ESPN Rittenberg. All
right. Adam, again, thanks to you and your colleagues for all this work. If people don't make lists, then we don't have anything to criticize. Be like, oh, man, I can't believe they had Utah 7th in the Big 12. What's wrong with those guys? They only put in 400 hours of work to make this list. And now we can come in and just pick it apart. So thanks again. We will see you soon, I'm sure. And we certainly appreciate your time here on KOTN.
You bet. The 25,000 word pieces, I just have you in mind, Doug. I have a big picture of you on my wall. You're my inspiration.
We are the audience. All right. We'll be right back on Kings of the North after this. Time for another KOTN Showdown. This one, Nebraska-Washington Landis. We've done Notre Dame, Penn State. That was pretty obvious. BYU, Indiana was pretty original. I don't know if anybody else in the country is doing this. This one,
I don't think so. Yeah.
Probably somewhere in between. It is two Big Ten teams, but I don't know that I hear a ton of people walking down the street and comparing Nebraska and Washington. We're calling this teams that would like to make a jump with year 2 starting quarterbacks. That's Damon Williams Jr., who was a wrinkle quarterback, started at the end of the year last year for Washington. That is Dylan Raiola at Nebraska, who started all of last year as a true freshman. Washington, only 2 seasons removed from the national title game. Nebraska, a proud program that is trying to get back to that level. I think either of these teams could at least have playoff stuff in their head, right? It would be championship, but if they believe, hey, 9-3 with a really big win, get in the conversation, I don't think either of these programs should be afraid of that.
No, I don't think they should be afraid of it. Feels like the next step for Nebraska off of 7-6 last year is something like 8-9 wins, right? So it's not crazy. I think the same thing for Washington. And when you have a young, kind of highly touted, exciting quarterback, I think that makes you believe in the idea a little more too. So I wouldn't say that either is like a dark horse playoff contender, but maybe, or not maybe. I think both have the possibility of elevating into that kind of status.
Yeah, and maybe only on a show like this would this even come up, but that's why we exist, Bill. So let's get into our 7 categories. KOTN Showdown. In the end, who would you rather be in 2025? We look at quarterback, skill positions on offense, offensive line, front 7 on defense, secondary, coaching, and then the schedule and intangibles before we come to our conclusion. Who's the Nebraska quarterback again?
Dylan Raiola.
He's
Perhaps
famous.
You've heard of him. Yeah, he is famous. Looks like acts like Patrick Mahomes. Signed a nice sponsorship deal with Adidas just for people to get even more
I did not know that.
interested / concerned about the Patrick Mahomes comparisons. But exciting young quarterback, I think, right? How would you characterize Dylan Raiola's freshman season? Because it was I think about what you would expect from a freshman, like on average, but probably a step short of what you would expect from a freshman with the recruiting pedigree of Dylan Raiola. And I think largely lacking in those sort of wow moments that, even if it's not a consistent body of work, makes you think like, oh yeah, this kid's got it. Like, just wait till he gets his feet under him kind of thing. So like, I don't I sense nothing but excitement from Nebraska about what Dylan Raiola is and what he can become, but I don't know that everything he put on the field last year is quite what you would have expected from a person who was at a point regarded as like the best quarterback in his class and certainly finished as still as a 5-star quarterback.
And it's one of those where he played more than Damon Williams. He played more than DJ Lagway. He played much more than CJ Carr or Julian Sayin, all of these other highly recruited quarterbacks in his class. And the result is there's probably less excitement around him than around any of those guys I mentioned who played far less football in 2024 because we like what we don't see. So I think it's possible his 2024 was just average enough to take away all the pressure and expectations of 2025 in a way that will both help him and is incorrect. Because if you're giving up on Dylan Raiola because he didn't do enough as a true freshman starter in the Big Ten, I think you're looking at it wrong.
I think that's right. I also think maybe he wasn't helped by DJ Lagway did not play as much, but when he did play, he looked good and Florida won.
He did.
And Raiola I actually think started off pretty strong and then just kind of flatlined and then sort of took a dip. And he was like, we'll talk about the coaches, like he was in an offense that was kind of out of sorts and maybe didn't have all the best weapons around him. And then his OC got let go and they brought in a new one. Like it was not by any stretch like the ideal circumstances to bring a true starting quarterback into. And he could be better off having gone through that now. It's just a matter of, I always worry about with young quarterbacks in those situations, do you develop the kind of bad habits or develop anything that might hinder you in your progression as you move forward? I don't know that happened necessarily for Dylan Raiola. And it does seem like Nebraska's entire offseason was like making sure that they put everything right around him.
Yes.
So I think he'll be fine. I would be lying though if I said like, should we rethink ultimately what his ceiling is? I'm not entirely sure about that. But to start off as hot as he did, which was like he had 9 touchdowns and 2 interceptions in his first 5 games, and then he had 2 touchdowns and like 9 interceptions the rest of the season. It was a freshman kind of hitting that wall about as hard as you'll see it happen for a guy that keeps playing in every game.
Absolutely ran out of juice as his offense was crumbling around him and they were dismissing the offensive coordinator and bringing in Dana Holgorsen and all these other things. Again, I was at that Friday night, day after Thanksgiving game between Iowa and Nebraska. And I thought you could literally see him run out of juice. And I think 80 different quarterbacks in college football win that game because Nebraska has a lead on the road and you just need someone to like lock it down and be competent and let Nebraska win. And that's not what happened. He got loose. He leaked. I thought he leaked. It was just like the air out of the. It's a good podcast all year, which is just, he didn't pop. I don't think he popped, but I think by the end of the year, the air was out of the balloon. But when the balloon deflates, you know what you can do? You can fill it back up with air. And after a balloon is filled with air and deflates, you know what happens when you fill it with air again? It's bigger because it got stretched out the first time around. And as long as you don't pop, you have a chance to come back better. And I think Dylan Raiola is going to be a bigger balloon.
Yeah. I don't know. He might request some different imagery, especially for a player who like much of the talk of the offseason was maybe he needs to lose a little bit of weight and become a little bit more mobile. Matt Rule said something like he can't play quarterback at 240 pounds, like he tried to do last year. So better, good analogy, but maybe I'd pick a slightly different one.
Because also when you reinflate the balloon, it gets a little saggy, but it's bigger. So so he wants to be. So the other guy, Damon Williams Jr., is completely the opposite of this. I want to ask you this question first, which is at the end of my notes. And the question is he the fastest quarterback in college football this year? Because Jalen Milroe's not around.
Maybe.
Maybe. The answer, I think, at the very least, is maybe.
Mm-hmm.
5'9", 190. Jed Fish, the Washington head coach, has called him the fastest player on Washington's team. I guess he's been timed at 4.4. When he gets scooting, he looks like he's shot out of a cannon, which is what Jalen Milroe looked like. But also, I think he's already laid down better accuracy than Jalen Milroe had at Alabama. He was 82 of 105 for 944 yards and 8 touchdowns last year. So he's accurate and he's shot out of a cannon. And people are fired up for this dude. In the bowl game, when he did start, 374 yards, 4 touchdowns, led him back at the end. There's a lot of confidence here. And Jed Fish wants to elevate this guy. And he followed Jed Fish from Arizona. And I don't know what to tell you, man. It is hard to pull yourself. I just said, hey, we love guys who haven't played. He's played enough. And he's had the wow moments that you're saying Raiola in a whole season kind of didn't have. He was a wrinkle QB with 2 starts at the end, and I think you could probably make a 15-play wow highlight reel of Damon Williams Jr.
I think there's some real juice there. It's hard to not get excited about what that could be. Now he's on the smaller side, I guess. Which
5'11", 190 is smaller, so you're talking 50 pounds lighter than Raiola at his biggest. Yeah,
like Jalen Milroe was like a thoroughbred, and I don't know what Damon Williams is.
Greyhound.
What's a fast small animal? Greyhound.
Yeah. Rabbit.
Yeah. Rabbit. Oh, rabbit's good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot there to like, and I think I think Damon Williams. And they're different quarterbacks, but I think he sort of already excels in the areas where Raiola needs to grow, which is like play extension, playmaking generally. I think Raiola probably should have. He doesn't have a ton of mobility, but he has some, and maybe he should have embraced that a little more last year, which is why I think Matt Rule said what he said about the playing weight that Raiola was at last season. So, there's a trade-off. Raiola's a big kid, and Damon Williams is not, and people tend to fall off of Dylan Raiola in a way that wouldn't happen with Damon Williams if they can get his hands on him.
Yeah.
So they're different in that way, but I think with any quarterback that's in this situation, right? It's like second-year guy looking to make a jump. You want to have seen some of those playmaking sparks, and it's not to say that Dylan Raiola can't do it because we didn't see a ton of it last year, but it's hard to bank on it. Whereas with Williams, we definitely saw that last year, and all it does is get you fired up about what he could be in 2025.
They lost their bowl game to Louisville because they went for 2 at the end after they scored what would have been the tying touchdown if they had kicked the extra point. He had a play on that drive with a minute left where he did a spin move to get out of the pocket under pressure and then reset himself and got drilled in the face by a defensive player coming in to sack him, but got the ball out just as the sack was coming and completed a pass to keep the drive alive, which is he's not that big, but he's tough and he'll take a hit like that. But he also had the extreme athleticism and composure in the moment to get out of the trouble, which again is what you're talking about. So I wanted to offer a defense of Dylan Raiola because I think we can feel nationally the disinterest. Seeing that, I don't want to go to the sequel. You want to see the movie the first time. You don't want to go to the sequel. But he's started a movie. But I'll take Damon Williams Jr. Along with the rest of the world.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's not 100-0. It's not a slam dunk. Oh my God, one guy's going to be an All-American, the other guy stinks. These are 2 very good second-year quarterbacks.
It feels like we're resetting with Raiola, and Williams is a continuation of exciting sparks from last year. And it's just much easier to get excited about the latter than it is a guy resetting. I want to throw out one stat I was looking up because there was some talk about Raiola in the spring, he needs to be better on third down kind of stuff. CFBstats.com, which is a good cumulative stats website. Big Ten quarterbacks who qualified, there were 25 of them total, third down passer rating. Raiola was 22nd out of 25. The only guys behind him were Jack Lausch and Mike Wright, the 2 Northwestern quarterbacks from last year, and Braden Locke was 25th. Damon Williams was 4th.
Okay. Now you're just rubbing it in.
Smaller sample size, but he was 4th.
We love Damon Williams. So, but we're not abandoning Dylan Raiola. But that category, quarterback we take in 2025, we'll take Damon Williams Jr. Skill position, yeah. Nebraska, what do you got?
I think we can just breeze past running back because Washington's got that one locked up in this conversation. Yeah. For Nebraska, it's actually interesting. Like Emma Johnson is back, but he's kind of the only guy who's back. Nebraska's portal behavior was odd because there are some spots that jump out to you. It was like, boy, they really could have attacked this, and they didn't. And some of them, including running back, like Matt Rule was very confident in the offseason. It's like, we have enough at running back. But if you look at what's coming back, it's Emma Johnson and like a bunch of unproven stuff. So I think Johnson's fine. He'll have to do more than he did last year, but he was a good running back. As kind of like the number 2 guy last season. So that position's in a weird spot. I do really like Nebraska's receiver room. Nebraska did a nice job in the portal at receiver. Went out and got Dane Key from Kentucky. Went out and got Isaiah Hunter from Cal. Returned Ja'Cory Barney, who was their leader in targets and receptions last year, playing out of the slot. Like I think those 3 guys together will work really well. Will give Dylan Raiola a lot to work with. A lot of people at Nebraska like pleased with the way that Hunter plays just from a physical standpoint, like goes up and gets contested catches, excuse me. Dana Holgorsen, the new offensive coordinator, just like, likes the physicality. I think that both Key and Hunter play with, and then you combine that with like the speed of a Barney in the slot. And I think you might have something there, and they could be like, 4 or 5 deep, depending on how some young guys come along too. So I think that is a position of strength for Nebraska. And then tight end could be too. Luke Lindemeyer stepping up, played well last year, really good blocker. A little unproven as a pass catcher, but an excellent blocking tight end. And I think he'll be tight end 1. Heiner Carberg, former quarterback, is moving to tight end. That's like an interesting athlete moving to that position. Mac Markway was a transfer from LSU in 2023, was a pretty highly regarded recruit. Played as a freshman at LSU, transferred to Nebraska last year, but then didn't play at all because he got hurt. So he's back. So that could be a fairly deep spot too. But I have a lot of questions about running back, but I think receiver can be pretty solid for this Nebraska team.
So I think it's possible that I've officially reached the point with Denzel Boston where I'm getting people too excited about him because he did not have 2,000 receiving yards last year. He actually was ninth in the Big Ten in receiving yards per game. I think he's 3rd, though, among Big Ten receivers who are coming back in receiving yards per game, only behind Jeremiah Smith from Ohio State and Elijah Surratt from Indiana. He fell off a little bit at the end. He had 200-yard games early in the season in September against Northwestern and Rutgers, and I think I had a parade. I think I can remember talking about him on the show when he did that. He didn't have another 100-yard receiving game the rest of the year, although he went 9 for 99 when they beat USC. So I still think there's like another level though. Giles Jackson was actually their leading receiver last year and he's gone, but Denzel Boston is a true number 1. They added Omari Evans from Penn State, who was like, okay, it's one of these things again. And I think we have to get used to this in the portal. Is this true, Landis? A guy, maybe the team that a guy left is not missing him, but yet he still can go help the team he's going to. So sure. Omari Evans left Penn State and Penn State, I think, is fine without him. And what was the whole discussion around Penn State last year? It's like, oh, the receivers aren't good enough. But that doesn't mean that Omari Evans can't help Washington this year. And I think he actually might be a pretty good number 2 behind a guy like Denzel Boston.
I think he could be. Yeah. I don't disagree with that. Because I don't think it'll probably help Omari Evans to be in an offense where he doesn't have to be the number 1 guy. And he didn't have to be last year because Trey Wallace was in Penn State's offense. But they were so desperate for receiver production that I don't know that did anybody any good. And like that is not the role that Omari Evans will be in at Washington.
Right. So keep that in mind. There's another guy, Rashid Williams, is a young guy that they really like, had a good spring. So they are losing. They lose Giles Jackson. They lose Jeremiah Hunter. So lost 2 of their top 3 receivers. But Boston's a real dude. And then Jonah Coleman, as you had mentioned before, was just an outstanding transfer running back last year and will continue to be so. Didn't do much in spring because he didn't need to. They were resting the vets, not giving him the reps. Adam Muhammad probably is their 2nd running back. People seem to like him. Jordan Washington, a lot of talk about him in the spring as kind of a jackknife 3rd type of running back. And then they had a freshman All-American at tight end, Decker DeGraff, to put on some weight, is up to like 245, and people seeming a little excited about. So Coleman and Boston are true ones. True one at running back, true one at receiver. And then I think there's enough other stuff behind them that I like this group. And I think I like Washington's skill better than Nebraska's.
I like Washington. You would not say there's 2 ones for Nebraska. Like there's not a true one running back in my opinion. We'll see. If Emmett Johnson's great, I'll eat those words, I suppose. And I don't know who like the number 1 receiver is going to be. I think it's nice to have options among the 2 transfers they've added and Ja'Cory Barney, but I would take Denzel Boston over all 3 of those guys. So
yeah,
I would lean Washington there. Yeah.
Okay. 63 catches, 834 receiving yards for Boston last year. He's a 1,000-yard receiver. So like, just be ready, but he's not a 4,000-yard receiver. So Doug, just chill out a little bit. All right. We'll give the skill. Not yet. We'll give the countdown is on. We'll give I was looking up stuff about, I was looking up receptions for first downs. Jaden Higgins had so many receptions for first downs last year for Iowa State. I think I'm going to put a bet on Jaden Higgins to be the offensive rookie of the year in the NFL from catching balls from CJ Stroud. I every time I think about Jaden Higgins, I'm like, that guy is actually much better than anyone realizes. Anyway, back to Nebraska and Washington. I'll start on the offensive line here for Washington because it was so terrible last year. And so it was a complete reshaping of the roster. They made the national championship game. Kalen DeBoer left. They lost 2 guys to the NFL draft. They lost other guys to the portal on the offensive line. So it's just uniforms. It's just the jerseys, the colors. There's nothing in common between the 2023 and 2024 Washington offensive line. But I just want to, as a comparison, Washington went from allowing 12 sacks in 15 games for Michael Penix on the way to the national championship game to allowing 39 sacks in 13 games. They went from 6th in the nation in sacks allowed per game to 121st. So what happened to Washington last year? It's this. And all they have to do is get back to somewhere in between 6th and 121st, and it's going to be transformative. And Jed Fish said, the biggest differences for this team are on the trenches on both sides of the ball, and I think it is going to be transformative for the offensive line. Carver Willis looks like he's going to be the left tackle, transfer from Kansas State. Drew Azzopardi looks like he's going to be the right tackle. He was a transfer from San Diego State last year, was kind of thrown in, but I think is going to come out of the wash on the other side as one of the 2 guys from last year's offensive line who will still play. I think those tackles are going to be pretty good. Hatchett brothers, Landon Hatchett, the likely center. He played last year, and then Gary and Hatchett, his brother, who transferred to Oklahoma, had been at Washington the year before in 23. He's back. They're probably the starting center and right guard. Left guard is probably Paki Finau, who is a redshirt freshman, but there are 2 true freshmen that Jed Fish and the offensive coaches have mentioned as being in the mix, John Mills and Champ Taliala, who could both mix in at guard. And I don't know if you think it's a good thing that true freshmen have shown up that way in the spring, because normally I think true freshman, if you're asking true freshmen to help you on the offensive line, you might be in trouble. But I think the 5 they're thinking about are potentially so much better than the guys they played last year. I'm not sure it's going to be better than average for the offensive line, but average is going to be such an improvement. It's transformative.
It feels like they attacked it pretty well. And average would be great. Average would be a tremendous improvement off of what they were. They'd sign up for average right now, I think. I don't like freshmen mixing in, I think is fine. Because it doesn't sound like they're like, we absolutely need these freshmen to be good or else we're screwed kind of thing. If it's not that, then I think you're okay. So
and it's not.
No, I think I think their offensive line, it's hard to be worse, but I think they'll be better this year. And they'll be helped too by Damon Williams' escapability too. So like those sack numbers will come down even just because of that.
All right. How's Nebraska's offensive line going to be?
I think pretty solid. I get like they addressed this in the portal pretty well too. Brought in Elijah Pritchett from Alabama. He's going to start at left tackle. Started at Alabama last year. It was fine. Like wasn't Alabama's best offensive lineman, but is a SEC starter coming to now start for Nebraska. Rocco Spindler from Notre Dame is going to start at one of the guard spots. It's unclear, I think, which one just yet, but he'll start at one of the guard spots. And then Justin Evans, who started at guard last year, was maybe Nebraska's best offensive lineman last year, is going to move to center. So he'll start at center. So like they have 3 spots that I think are pretty well sewn up with left tackle, a guard position, and center. And then they have options to figure out the other 2. It's weird. There's like a collection of like older injury, like snake bitten offensive linemen at Nebraska, but I think all of whom sort of have talent provided they can stay healthy. They had a lot of guys out in the spring because of that. Like we're just kind of like rehabbing. Gunnar Gatola started 9 games at tackle last year. Hunter Lutovsky started 11 games at guard last year. We talked about Turner Corcoran, I think maybe on the offensive line show. Like he started 34 games. He's had debilitating injuries, but he started 34 games at tackle. I think between those 3,
got hurt in the preseason last year, right? Wasn't he a preseason injury? It was Jagusaw at Notre Dame and Corcoran at Nebraska were the big preseason tackle injuries.
Yeah, so I think between those 3, Gatola, Lutovsky, and Corcoran, like you can figure out right tackle and the other guard spot, and I think feel pretty good about it. And like provided like everyone's healthy, then you suddenly have some like experienced depth too. There's some younger guys, Grant Brooks being one of them, who's like a really highly rated recruit going into his second year, so maybe he can make a jump. So this was not a great offensive line last year. It wasn't as bad as Washington's, but still not a tremendous offensive line. I think they'll be better this year, and I think did a really good job of going out and getting experienced Power 4 linemen to plug some holes at tackle and guard.
I think the answer is Nebraska here. Better offensive line, both improved, both pretty solid, but Nebraska a tier above.
I would lean Nebraska. I don't think it's like a wide gap, but I would lean Nebraska there. Yeah.
Okay, we'll give that one to Nebraska. Defensive front 7. What do you have for the Cornhuskers?
I don't know what to make of this. Again, it's another spot that's just changing a lot. That the whole defense is changing, including the coaching. But like there were 4 guys who played the majority of the snaps last year. They're all gone. I think most notably Ty Robinson and Nash Hutmaker and Jamari Butler are probably the top 3. They're all gone. There's some guys who were like reserve edges last year who also transferred out. It could have been starting this year. So like on the interior, there are 3 guys back: Cameron Lenhart, Elijah Judy, Riley Van Poppel, who have played a little bit. It sounds like Nebraska feels pretty good about them, even though they haven't played a ton. They did not add what I would consider like high impact transfers, or at least like they're projecting here. Jalen George from East Tennessee State, and then Gabe Moore from Mississippi State, who like hasn't played. From the portal on the interior. So like there's probably 5 guys to play defensive tackle, and like it's a 3-3 kind of defense. So they don't need a whole lot there, but like there's Ty Robinson was just so good, and Nush Hatmaker was such a presence that like those 2 guys are going to be hard to make up for. I'm actually a little surprised in some of the confidence that's being projected about Nebraska's defensive line, given what it's lost. Part of that might be from some of the guys they have like at the edge / linebacker spot, which like Williams Nwaneri from Missouri, who was the number 6 overall player in the country 2 recruiting classes ago, is still very much just getting his career going. Like maybe he's just ready to pop and he'll be a monster on the edge and he'll be unblockable, and that'll really transform Nebraska's defensive line. I think you throw Deshaun McCullough in there too as like a jack linebacker transfer from Oklahoma. Maybe he can give you some pass rushing upside. Willis McGahee, the 4th, played well as a true freshman last year. Like, so he's back and he'll play more. And I think it's reasonable to be excited about him. Vincent Shavers and Javen Wright also played a decent amount of linebacker last year. So like there's guys back who have played, not a ton back who have started. I think I can sort of see the vision with some of the younger edge guys, but I'm a little skeptical of what exactly they'll be in the middle of their defensive line with what they have to replace.
Okay, this is going to be a tough one. Washington has completely reshaped its front 7 defensively in the portal. And this is a theme. I was going to save it for coaching, but basically Jed Fish after their spring game was saying, last year, we just were desperately throwing guys around, trying to figure out how to build a roster, a thing that has been a theme for us just offseason of when you have a new coach, you just got to go in the portal and you can't be picky. You need quantity. And he basically said, now we've been able to go get the guys we want and build the roster the way we want it. And they're just bigger. We don't lack for size, said Ryan Walters, the new defensive coordinator. Which was an issue last year. Like they just weren't big enough on the defensive line. So they added Ontario Thompson, 6'4", 306 from Western Michigan, had been at Iowa before that, was a good MAC player last year. We like linemen who were guys moving up. Samante Peppa was at Utah last year, 6'3", 350, kind of a load, regular rotation guy for Utah last year. He's going to help. They got another guy from Arizona. They got a linebacker from Washington State. They got another linebacker from Central Florida, Zari Alexander. They're probably their front seven. They might start 5 transfers, but it's a reset because last year it was patchwork and this year it's more of a plan. And again, are they going to be super dynamic up front and have a bunch of All-Americans? No. Are they going to be better? Undoubtedly, because they have more of a plan. And a guy like Ontario Thompson, just as of note to us, it feels like it's the profile, the kind of guy that probably can come to a place like Washington and make an immediate impact. So I think they'll be fine. And whether we go with Washington or Nebraska here as the better front seven, I think depends on how good you think Nebraska's going to be. Is Nebraska going to be better than fine up front defensively?
I don't know. Nebraska actually had a really good run defense last year, and spearheaded by those 2 defensive tackles. And I just don't know that they can be as good. Now, they might be better. They'll be better getting after the quarterback, especially if when Nwaneri hits and McCullough starts to get comfortable at that jack position. I could see it almost flipping to where they're a little better against the pass up front and a little worse off against the run. And I think they'll have depth. I just don't know what the ceiling is. I think it could be maybe a more of a Big Ten average to above average defensive line, but maybe one that doesn't have a lot of drop off. So which is that's not nothing over the course of a long season. That is valuable. So I think I would lean probably fine. I don't know that it's going to be a super high end defensive line, and I don't know that it's going to be better than it was last year, especially at tackle.
I think it's close. I think we're hoping for 2 front sevens that are going to be average, but we're not 100% sure they're going to be average. So I don't know how to decide this. This is made up and it's our thing, so we can do whatever we want. We could call this a tie because there's enough uncertainty. A tie that we think they'll both be okay, but we're not sure. So it's a tie.
I'm okay with that. I guess the one thing, if you wanted to use recruiting pedigree of new players as a tiebreaker, I think Nebraska is probably better, but that can also be.
But do we think that's dangerous. Good in the portal? Would you be rather be getting a guy who's a 5-star or whatever, or a try-hard Mac guy who was really productive last year? Again, we've had that million of the conversations. So let's call it a tie for now. Secondary. Okay. What do we talk about with Nebraska?
I think their secondary could be pretty good. Sierra Wright was very good at corner last year. Transferred from USC, and he was a bit of a revelation, and he's back. And they added a transfer from Idaho, Andrew Marshall, who was first team All Big Sky last year, probably to start at the other corner spot. And then safety has a lot of experience. Deshaun Singleton, good player at safety, is back, multi-year starter. Malcolm Hartzog had to play corner last year, but everyone in Nebraska thinks he's better off as a safety, and now he kind of gets to move back to that spot. And then Mario Buford is the one guy who's sort of a young guy who hasn't played a ton, but people are excited about. I think he's a second-year player to step up and play the third kind of safety spot in a 3-3-5. So perhaps a chance to be the strength of the defense, at least in my opinion, based off of what guys have done thus far. I think that I look at what the guys coming back in the secondary have done, and I feel better about that than I do the front seven for Nebraska. So I think they have a chance to be fairly solid there.
Okay, this is going to be another difficult one then, because Washington added Takario Davis at corner, who is as good as any corner in the portal. Ephesian Prysock followed Jed Fish from Arizona last year. Takario Davis stayed at Arizona for a year and followed Jed Fish this year. In 2023, these guys were the 2 starting cornerbacks for Arizona, and they were both pretty stinking good, and they're both 6'4". So they are 2 6'4" corners who have played together before, who are going to be the outside corners for Washington. And then Rashawn Clark was a guy who everybody was talking about after the spring. I don't know how they track this. It's a stat that the coaches talked about. He had 7 interceptions during spring practices. So he sort of sees the slot corner job. He's a ball hawk, big deal. They also added Alex McLaughlin from Northern Arizona, who is first team All Big Sky, 2-year starter at Northern Arizona. There's some really good pieces in this secondary, man. They need it. Corners that they need. Again, this is another one of those. It's very hard. You almost throw out last year in a lot of ways. from the player perspective with Washington. But man, McLaughlin and Davis as two veteran starters to add to the secondary, and then Clark made a huge move in the spring, and Prysock's back. I don't know, man. I think this could be a pretty good secondary. I might lean Washington here, but I think Nebraska has a good case. They tied in the front seven because we weren't sure about either. If they tie here, it's because we're both pretty sure the secondary is going to be pretty good.
Yeah, I could lean Washington a little. My question with Washington, and it sort of goes hand in hand with the new defensive coordinator Ryan Walters, like the way he wants to play, you need dudes in your secondary. When he was at Illinois and got himself the Purdue head coaching job, over the course of 2 years, he had 3 defensive backs who were 2 third-round picks and a first-round pick.
Mm-hmm.
Kirby Joseph, Devin Witherspoon, and Sidney Brown. Like, you need that kind of talent to play the way that Ryan Walters wants to play in the Big Ten. But I think Washington might have it.
I think they might have it.
At least a corner, like a Prysock and Davis, I think can handle that. I would maybe lean Washington because while I like Sierra Wright quite a bit, like Washington, I think has 2 more like ready, reliable corners.
Okay.
And safety might be a bit of a wash, but I think that might be enough to lean Washington's way slightly.
All right. Let's lean Washington.
Yeah.
This is getting interesting. Coaches, Washington. Let me start here. They lost both their coordinators because they were Nepo baby coordinators, and they both went to work for their dads again. Brennan Carroll, the offensive coordinator, went to work for his dad, Pete, with the Raiders, and Steve Belichick, the defensive coordinator. We're recording this ahead. If the entire Belichick family has been wiped out at North Carolina by the time this airs, we apologize. But yeah. Steve Belichick left. They played that up a year ago when they had the NFL connections. But Ryan Walters, as a failed head coach at Purdue, as a failed young head coach who got that opportunity because he was a great defensive coordinator, is potentially a great hire here. And Jim Knowles at Penn State deserves to be talked about, but Ryan Walters here is potentially a game changer for Washington. Because last year at Illinois had 31 turnovers that they gained, which was the most in the Power 4 and the second in the nation. He's talked about this. Go get the ball. He was talking about that this spring. Making plays on the ball. It's a focus. He's seeing it. It's easy to say. It's hard to do. But he has a track record of doing it. And to your point, is a great point by you. You've got to have dudes to play this defense. But if you have dudes, they're going to get after you. And I think they're probably right on the dude line. They are balanced. They are teetering on the border of, do we have enough dudes or not? Because if you're playing a dude-friendly defense and you don't have the dudes, you're going to get smoked. Yeah. Because you're going to say, hey, we're going to get after you. We're going to blitz. We're going to put guys on islands and be aggressive. And then it's like, oh, you are? Boop. 65-yarder over your head. But if you can do it, man, it's got a shot. I'm super intrigued by what Walters is going to bring to this. And I think Jed Fish is better at this than I realized. I think he has a good vibe. I think he has a good plan. He's the play caller. I think he has a good relationship. Damon Williams Jr., he recruited him. He followed him from Arizona. And I think they have, like, that's your head coach. We talked about having an offensive head coach as your play call, your play caller. That can be an advantage sometimes. I think Fish and Walters running these two sides of the ball has a chance to be really good. Really good.
I think so. Yeah. Certainly better situated than they were last year.
Yeah.
Actually, some of the underlying numbers for Washington's defense last year weren't terrible, but some of that was smoke and mirrors. No, I think they stand a chance to be much improved from last year. And I think the same for Nebraska, but I don't. Start with Dana Holgorsen. Like, I think Dana Holgerson's an upgrade on Marcus Satterfield at offensive coordinator. How good that can be, I'm not sure, but I think they'll be better, which is kind of like all you can ask for. I think as it became clear that Nebraska was going to need to make a move at offensive coordinator, and then in the offseason when they lost defensive coordinator Tony White to Florida State, I thought Matt Rule could have been more aggressive in addressing both, and he wasn't. Both of the new hires, Holgorsen and John Butler on defense, were already in the building. Both of them have experience. Both Butler in the NFL and in college, Holgorsen as a head coach and a coordinator. Like I'm not saying they're not cut out for the job necessarily. I just don't know that either one came with the level of excitement maybe that you would hope for. But maybe Nebraska doesn't need excitement. Maybe they just need somebody to be steady and like organized, and that could be enough for them. I am mildly concerned, I guess, that the guy that was promoted the defensive coordinator was the passing game coordinator for a defense that ranked 102nd in the country in passing efficiency defense. So I don't know what that's going to look like. And then that's not always a reflection of the secondary either, which is what John Butler coached. It could just be lack of pass rush, and maybe that can be balanced out with some of the guys they added up front in the portal. But even though Ryan Walters is like a failed head coach in glorious fashion, that hire excites me a lot more than anything Nebraska did at either of its coordinator positions. A couple new assistants on the defensive side as well, along with John Butler. And then like Matt Rule, I think is in a like I think Matt Rule carried like a lot of favor for getting Nebraska back to having a winning football season and snapping that streak of not having bowl games or whatever, but also the year 2 jump that he showed at Temple and Baylor did not materialize the same way in Nebraska, which has me rethinking a little bit what the trajectory might be.
So we going Washington for the coaching edge?
I would probably go Washington. Yeah.
I would go Washington. All right, we'll go Washington, which leads us to schedule and intangibles. Washington faces 5 teams coming off buys this year, which is just one of those things that doesn't help you. Ohio State, Maryland, Rutgers, Illinois, Wisconsin. Last year, they won all their games at home and lost all their games when they were away from home. This year, they get Ohio State, Oregon, and Illinois at home. I'm curious if they can get one of those. That's sort of the defining thing. If they can get one of those, if they could get 2 of those, oh my gosh, like you're off to the races. But their road games, Washington State, Maryland, Michigan, Wisconsin, UCLA. There's some winnable road games in there when they didn't win on the road last year. Now, last year when they lost on the road, they lost to Rutgers, Iowa, Indiana, Penn State, Oregon, and Washington. Washington State was at a neutral site. But so anyway, it's not like they lost to only great teams on the road. My bottom line is the bye thing is tough. And then when you are good at home and you have good opponents coming in, is that opportunity, or is that like, oh man, now we're going to lose a bunch of games at home? I think the bye thing is really quite an intangible issue. Just the thing that hits you weird. But the opportunity, especially Ohio State and Oregon, just imagine if Damon Williams Jr. gets that place rocking and they upset Ohio State or Oregon. Ohio State's in September. Oregon's the last game of the year. Like there's a lot of opportunity here. So I like the opportunity, but there's also some tough schedule stuff.
I don't know. Like, so Nebraska's win total 7.5, which I think, if they surpass it, would represent an improvement from winning 7 games last year. I think, I don't want to speak for Nebraska fans, but my assumption is like they would probably be pretty okay with just like another winning season. Nebraska hasn't had back-to-back winning seasons since the last 2 years of Bo Pelini. But I also wonder if, like, now that they've finally gotten sort of over that hump and had a winning season and got to a bowl game, if the expectations just sort of like jump sort of like through the roof now in a way that's not quite fair. Because I don't think the schedules could get you to 9 wins, but maybe 10 wins. Like the only game you look at and think like, nope, you're not going to win that game is at Penn State on November 22nd. Play Michigan, play USC. Like, don't have to play Ohio State, don't have to play Oregon. Don't have to play Indiana. And don't play Illinois. So like it's not like they're running like through all the best teams in the Big Ten necessarily, but like the Penn State game is a real test that I don't think Nebraska's ready for. I could absolutely see Nebraska losing to Michigan and USC, and then like they have to get the rivalry with Iowa back on their terms, and they haven't done it. Iowa's won 10 of the last 12. Nebraska should have won the game last year, and they didn't. The game this year is in Lincoln. Nebraska hasn't beaten Iowa in Lincoln since 2011. There's a lot riding on that game. Like it's like win the ones you're supposed to win. That gets you to a winning season, and then beat Iowa. And I think like that's probably comfortable for Matt Rule. I just don't know if there's much more out there beyond like trying to get yourself to 8 wins after winning 7 games last year. unless like some of the questions I have on the defensive line in particular are going to be answered rather emphatically in the positive. I'm not like I'm not 100% convinced that like Nebraska is definitely better than it was last year.
Okay, that makes sense. Although a Raiola jump in there would go a long way.
Yeah,
to
I
them
think
better than they were.
I think a Raiola jump gets you there. Like clearly they're better at receiver, but I don't know where else they're definitely better besides that.
Yeah, lost some guys up front. Okay, but maybe intangibles and schedule to Nebraska.
Yeah, I mean that bye week thing's tough. Yeah, probably. What's Washington's win total? Do you not have it? It's fine if you don't have it in front of you. I just don't know. Like, there are a lot of toss-ups on Nebraska's schedule. Like the ones I laid out, I didn't mention they open with Cincinnati, like in Kansas City.
Mm-hmm.
I think Nebraska's better than Cincinnati. Like that's kind of a weird opener, like a somewhat challenging opener.
Fun.
You and I both
like
Minnesota.
Yes.
Yeah. You and I both like Minnesota. They play at Minnesota in October. Like, I think Nebraska's range is anywhere from like 5-7 to 9-3, and anything in that range would not surprise me.
Yeah. Okay. Let's give it to Nebraska, and let's go back and give the front seven to Nebraska that we had called a tie since Washington got a bunch of other stuff. So in conclusion, we're being nice here.
Yeah, sure.
Washington, we said quarterback, skill positions, secondary, and coaching. We went with Washington. Offensive line, Nebraska. Front seven by a hair, Nebraska. And in intangibles, Nebraska. In conclusion, I officially am Nebraska curious.
Mm-hmm.
But having gone through this exercise, I thought I was trending this way anyway, but I am Washington excited. Yeah. I would rather be Washington in 2025.
I was just going to say that. I'm excited about Washington. I don't know what to think of Nebraska, but I'm excited about Washington.
I'm not forlorn about Nebraska. I don't think they're on alert for a disaster, but I just think there's more. It's a lot like the quarterback question. There's just a little more, few more flashes, a little more upside, a little more things that you can grab onto to be excited about, both at quarterback and throughout the team for the Huskies.
I think the arrow is definitely pointed up for Washington. And I don't think it's down for Nebraska, but I wonder if it's just sort of on a whatever level plane from last year.
Yes.
And maybe we don't. I don't want to poo-poo like a back-to-back winning seasons for Nebraska, even if that's merely what this is, because that program needs it and the fan base needs it. But it's hard for me to wrap my arms around a jump from Nebraska, and I can get there rather easily with Washington.
Okay. All right. We will go with Washington for who you would rather be in 2025 in our KOTN Showdown. Back on Kings of the North, I have 2 internet feeds in my house, and they both went out. So sorry about that for an extra little long pause there. Thanks for joining us here on KOTN. We'll be back on Wednesday. I think we're going to do sort of like a Big Ten SEC comparison thing to talk about like what you really want to be as a conference anymore. So I think we're going to compare some teams, but we're going to go head to head a little bit there. We'll do Watch You on Wednesday. Landis will be back live, and we appreciate you guys being here. Thanks as always to our great producer, Mike Urostowski, for making us look good and sound good. Thanks to Adam Rittenberg for joining us. For now, we will see you guys on Wednesday. I'm Doug Lesmerises, and that was Kings of the North.